Okay, great. Well, thank you for reaching out to the Speakers Bureau um, for the Federal Reserve System. We're making significant efforts to try to help the public understand the types of things that we do for the community. And so it's really important to us whenever we have the opportunities to share what we're doing. And thank you for requesting me to present to you. One of the first things I need to mention is just the fact that anything that I am presenting today is my perspective and not that of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis or any other Federal Reserve bank or the system as a whole. So I want to make sure that's really clear. In some ways, maybe if you could all go on mute, that'd be helpful because I'm hearing a lot of background noise. So just to help you, give you a little bit of background of the Federal Reserve and what we do in payments. So my role within the Federal Reserve is twofold. One is I lead a division within the Minneapolis Bank that works on national and international standards related to primarily payments, but also financial services as a whole. And then in addition to that, I have responsibilities for something I'll be talking about in a second here. It's called SIP, Strategies for Improving the U.S. Payment System. And within that, the B2B payment efficiency. So how businesses pay each other and how can we modernize payments between corporations. And before I go into that, the Federal Reserve, a lot of people don't realize that it was founded for the purpose of facilitating efficient commerce. Back in 1907, there was a financial crisis, and believe it or not, back then, there were something like 30,000 currencies in the United States. There was not a standard currency. So the US dollar did not exist as it is today at that time. And what happened was there's a financial crisis, and every bank had their own currency, and you never knew how liquid the bank was. They would have, people would give them the deposits and they would lend out money, but nobody would know how well they were managing their financials at any point in time. And so when the financial crisis happened, a lot of banks were going under. And think of yourself as a merchant at the time, and you basically have some type of method for every time somebody comes in looking at that currency and say, okay, yep, I trust this currency, I trust this bank, I will accept it. And then having to go and take that money to that particular bank, or use the wide variety of currencies that you've received that day. So it was not very efficient at all. And so when that happened, the merchants were like, well, I don't know if I can accept this bank's currency. It's from 20 miles away, and back then that was a long ways away, and so commerce just completely seized up. And as a result of that, Congress determined that there needed to be a standardized dollar, and there needed to be regulations to assure businesses that they could trust the dollar, they could trust the currency. And that's what led to the establishment of the Federal Reserve System in the United States back in 1913. So I bring that up because this whole payment efficiency and our mission in payments was truly the reason why the Federal Reserve was founded. It wasn't for monetary policy. That came many years later. And it wasn't, supervision regulation came along with it, but that wasn't the founding purpose of it originally. And now that we're in this, our role is to foster the integrity, the efficiency, the accessibility of the system, trying to make it as ubiquitous as possible. And we do that through these three broad categories. One is the leader catalyst role. So that means we engage with the industry, the payments industry, and all the stakeholders, and we try to catalyze them to solve the problems. So we'll hear from them, gee, there's this problem out there. We'll try to get them to come together and say, hey, let's work together to solve that problem. But they're the ones solving it. We don't have any type of regulatory power or anything that the US government, Congress tells us what we can or cannot do. I mean, they've given us a charter, and we literally cannot do anything that's outside of the specifications of what they indicate the Federal Reserve can do. And if we ever want to do something different, let's say if we were to get involved in a central bank digital currency, we literally couldn't do it if we wanted to, because of the nature of a cryptocurrency. Congress would first have to give us the authority, and then we would follow what Treasury asks us to do. So in many ways, we're like an operational arm of Treasury from a payments perspective. Service provider, we do provide wire systems. We do provide the demand deposit or ACH system service. We're one of multiple providers, but we're generally, if we're involved in the payments processing, we view ourselves as a provider of last resort in many respects. So in other words, if the private sector can't effectively provide it in a ubiquitous manner, then we'll step in to help. And usually we're helping the smaller independent community banks, the ones that are in rural areas that you know, the large financial institutions may not find it economically beneficial to serve and things like that. So we're stepping in just to try to assure that there's, you know, equitable access to financial services throughout the United States. And then finally, the fiscal agent, we provide a lot of services to the Treasury Department, such as we process probably 30% of all invoices for business to government type work, and a number of other things, payment protection services that came out through the pandemic. Treasury came to us and asked us to deliver those payments. And so we do what Treasury asks us to do. So I'm sorry, I went a little bit long-winded on that, but I think it's really important that people understand what we do. The next thing is this improving the U.S. payment system. Back in about 2012, there was starting to be acknowledgement that maybe the U.S. needed to do some things to improve our payment system, and that's kind of at the heart of what I'll be talking about a little bit more today. The increased technology and what that's meant on the payment system, and even, you know, just as important, watching what other countries around the world are doing and how rapidly they're innovating, and are we keeping up with it? Historically, we've been the leaders from probably the 1950s, 60s, you know, through to just, you know, recently, the United States has been looked upon as the technology leader in payments, and that's coming to question now. We still are, but you know, that's being challenged. And back in 2012, we started reaching out to the industry and asking what needs to be improved in the U.S. payment system. Went through like a 3-year process, and they landed on these things that need to be improved: speed of payments, security of payments, the efficiency, cross-border efficiency, and then finally, collaboration is more of there need to be increased collaboration within the industry across all stakeholders to achieve this. So if you ever hear me say throughout this presentation, SIPS, S-I-P-S, Strategies for Improving the U.S. Payment System, that's an acronym we use here and in our industry groups quite frequently. And I can't see chat or anything, so if anybody does put a question in chat, or if you want to, you know, I'll try to take a breath here and there to give you a chance to ask questions. Any questions right now on that part? Okay. So what I want to talk about today is something that's really near and dear to my heart, and that's what's been the impact of technology advancement on the U.S. payment system and the global payment system overall. I'll be talking about the U.S. payment system, and bottom line, from my perspective, the internet has had a greater impact than I think anybody has fully comprehended yet. Whether it's what we've seen in terms of information sharing, the political system, and also the payment system. And we've, every year, I think we're learning about new vulnerabilities that are coming about, and things that we'd never thought about. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about a little bit about blockchain and cryptocurrencies, and maybe a little bit about the long-term solutions on that. And again, anybody, if I'm getting late in time, is it to what time do I have till to 2:30 or to what time do I have until to go to?
The meeting, I think I teed up for until 3 in theory.
Okay.
That's when we might run the risk of something accidentally closing out on us. So you're okay for the moment.
Okay. Don't hesitate to tell me to speed it up at any point. So, the U.S. payment system, this is kind of the key point I was just leading to right now, and that is that most of the U.S. payment systems, all but one, and a second one that's in development right now, was designed before the internet. And not only was it designed before the internet, it was designed before XML came about. And I'm assuming this group, being somewhat technical, would understand what XML is and what that has done to really facilitate communication across the internet, the tagging of data to help people readily identify what is the data that follows it. Mobile phones, the systems were designed before mobile phones, before the whole mass connectivity of the combination of mobile phones and the internet together. I mean, those two coming together really had I don't know if I'll call it an explosive impact on mass connectivity. And we only now, I'd say only probably 4 or 5 years ago, really started to see the extent of the impact on the payment systems. And one thing I just want to make real clear here, at the first part of this presentation, I'm going to be talking about the vulnerabilities, and it's going to say, wow, this is really bad. But in spite of everything I'm saying here, I want to make it really clear that that the financial institutions out there, everybody that's involved in the payment systems, in spite of all the new vulnerabilities I'm going to be talking about, they do an incredibly good job of mitigating fraud. Obviously, there can be improvement out there, and there needs to be improvement. But even given all these new vulnerabilities, it's not like, gee, there's 40% fraud in the United States or 20% fraud. It's less than 10%, and in many cases and channels, it's less than that too. So just want to be clear about that. But what we want to do is we want to catalyze the U.S. payment system to modernize, and that means have ubiquitous reach. No matter who you are, there's a lot of people that haven't been included in the financial system for a variety of reasons. Payment transparency, that this is where businesses and people, even when you're paying for something, you want to know, where is the payment in the process? Somebody sends you a payment like through Venmo right now, and you're like, well, you've got it in Venmo right away. Is it in your bank account if you transfer it? Does it take 3 days? Is it 1 day? Is it immediate? It could be any one of those right now. And people want to know personally, but on the business side, they have a much larger need to know what place are they at? What state is that payment process at? Payment speed. Instant payments. Venmo, I think, is one of the things that brought this up, and now Zelle, where people really want to have instant access to their funds. They don't want to, you deposit a check and it's a check for $1,000, therefore you only have $500 in your bank. Well, you have to wait 2 days or 3 days or something until that check clears before you get access to the funds. We wanted to try to eliminate all of that. And then the last thing is this process automation. This is especially true for B2B payments. There's a tremendous amount of cost that's been introduced into electronic payments. So believe it or not, a paper payment oftentimes is more cost effective to process than an electronic payment for businesses. And we're working really hard to solve that particular problem right now. So what are some of the things that have happened? I'm going to go into each one of these. I'm not going to read them off right now. But this is a list of 6 different things that I'm going to cover. And the first thing is that increased internet connectivity. If you think about it now, that it's this basic saying, looking at a daily basis, 31% of all adults are on the internet almost constantly. 48% several times a day. So a vast majority of the adult population is constantly on the internet or on it quite a bit. And then you go into device ownership, and you look at the shift that's happened. In 2012, if you look at it, any cell phone was 88, now it's up to 97%. But look at the smartphone. It was 39% and it's up 85%. In some respects, I'm surprised in 2012 it was only 39%. But if we were to look at this back in probably 2004, it's surprising. If you didn't have a BlackBerry, you probably didn't have a smartphone. And it was a very small percent. So now you've got internet, you've got the mobile phone, and a couple interesting things happen. Suddenly we're making payments remotely from your computer. And then about 10 years later, you're making payments from your phone. And now we probably don't even think twice about making a payment from the phone. And for those who use Uber or some of these other services like that, you may even change to the point where I prefer Uber over a taxi simply because I prepaid. I don't like having to pay at the end of the ride. And I hope there's no taxi drivers here that take exception to that. But so it's really significantly changing the channel and the devices from which payments are initiated. Now, another aspect of the internet and mass communications is just look at the extent of people that are using YouTube, that are using Facebook. And Facebook is particularly interesting, and I'll talk about that in a couple of slides from here. But there's just a tremendous number of people out there. 65%, 69%, I guess, use Facebook, and this is adults in the United States. We get down into, to the right, you get more, what is the younger generation doing? So, they're into Snapchat, they're into Instagram, 95% use YouTube, TikTok. So, just a tremendous amount of social media activity and connection that's been facilitated by the internet. So what does that mean? It's had a dramatic impact on fraud. It's increased account takeover, identity theft, remote payment fraud, counterfeit card fraud. And the reason for it is that in the past, you had to either go dumpster diving or go around and take mail out of people's mailboxes and things like that to try to get more information about them. Now, all you do is you surf the internet, and there's lots of ways that the more sophisticated people that have malicious intent can go out and they can find in the box here. This is just a small sample of the information they can find out about you. And it's amazing what they can do once they have that information to start basically what's the word? Basically in personalizing, I'm sorry, actually as imposter view using your information. And in fact, one of the most complex forms of fraud that's happening out there is they're calling it synthetic fraud. And what synthetic fraud is, it's a mix of real information and completely fictitious information and pulling it together and creating basically a credit profile. And then they go and they get all these financial services, and next thing they know, maybe they have $50,000 worth of credit. They use all that credit and they're gone. And there's no way to find out where, find them, because they never existed in the first place. It was completely fictitious identity. A very significant issue out there, and very difficult for institutions to identify it when it's happening. So that's this abundance and ease of access of that information has really introduced significant challenges for financial institutions in the payment industry to try to mitigate the fraud. The other thing that's happened is, think of all the new software tools that are out there. So you got cyber attacks. There's something they call man-in-the-middle attacks. So that's where you try to put this sophisticated security in it using cryptography and stuff, but they'll insert some type of a middleware bot or something like that onto your computer or possibly your phone, and that's intercepting the information that's going through your phone or your computer, and they're able to capture all kinds of information to use maliciously. And then go down the line of this. And these are all things that have been facilitated by, again, that mass connectivity, the sophisticated software that's out there. You think about it, there's entities out there that they might only be putting 12 hours a day in because they're motivated, they're passionate, and they're building these robots, software robots. And those software robots are attacking the payment system 24 hours a day. And you know, they can add every day, if they could potentially add a new attack or adjust the parameters of that robotic attack. So think about it. In 1990, none of this capability existed, and if it did exist, it wasn't scalable in any way whatsoever. And now it's highly scalable, and the reach to it is incredible. And the fact that you can design a bot and go and have coffee or go out on your yacht that you bought with the stolen money and have your bot just keep attacking, it's just something nobody ever dreamt of when they designed the payment system. So now you go to breaches. You used to hear a lot about breaches. The Target breach locally is probably one of the most famous ones. There's a Heartland, which is an acquirer for merchants. They acquire the transactions from the merchants, payment processor. There have been a number of other ones, very notable breaches that have received a lot of publicity. And this again is one of these things where somehow they plant malicious software on the systems, and they start capturing the information and sending it out to these parties that will use it fraudulently. That was not something that could be done before the internet, unless you came in and somebody stole the information off your computer with disks or jump drives or whatever they might have been. Overall growth of e-commerce is a very big thing that's coming with this. So these are all new vulnerabilities that are a result of the internet. It's a result of the increased power of the software tools that are made available to those with malicious intent. I'm going to pause there. It's a bit of a monologue. I don't want to put anybody to sleep. Anybody have any questions or thoughts? Okay, then I'm going to keep going until somebody jumps in. So the next thing is rapid acceleration of remote payments, and then the rapid introduction of new payment devices. So what do I mean by that? And what does that look like? And this is, if you look back to even pre-1960, we had checks, then also cards without make stripes were out there, and then we came with make stripes. And years after the make stripes were put on the card, they actually introduced the terminals, the EDC POS, so electronic data capture terminals, so they could actually swipe your card. If you remember the paper capture, we always had to write something out in the paper, and the zip zap machines and that type of thing. Well, it wasn't until the 80s where that became much more prevalent to do the electronic data capture. Then you get about to the mid 90s. And what happens? The internet and Windows, and suddenly the average person can access the internet, and of course businesses think, wow, it's a new sales channel, and so they put catalogs up, and they say, well, call us and give us your credit card information, and we'll process it. What a fabulous avenue for fraud and capturing credit card information, but cost benefit analysis for those businesses to sell through that channel, there definitely was a strong business case to do it, even though the payment and the fraud mitigation efforts were nowhere near ready to secure that channel. And again, if it had gotten so bad that they were losing money, they would have stopped it. But the cost of the fraud was not greater than the profits that they were bringing in for that.
I got a question. Does anyone rob banks anymore with a gun like we always saw in the movies?
Ironically, they do, but they're usually not very educated ones, because you can do it. You can you can steal so much more without any risk of being caught if you've got the electronic, computer technology savvy. So, but it's not something that we talk about much at all because it's not where the big dollar frauds are. And so as we progress this now, when you get up to, in let's say 2004 or 5 range, I think is when the first capability for mobile payments happened, but the industry wouldn't really kind of accept it. When I say mobile payments at a terminal, at a store, but mobile payments of paying over the internet started happening. So whether it's on your computer or on the phone, we called it card on file, right? So you didn't want to enter your credit card each time. Number one, that's a security risk. But the other thing, to the merchant, it was a risk of a cart abandonment, they call it. So it's like, I don't want to enter all this in again. Forget it. Next time I go to the store, I'll buy it. And so there's a high cart abandonment rate. So they said, okay, let's store their card information, give them the option to store it. And then when they come back, then it's much more convenient for them to buy something from us. And that was great, but that led to data breaches because now all these companies that had a mixed bag of security policies and procedures and firewalls for all that credit card and debit card information behind it, it was just sitting there piling up. There's this gold mine. And sure enough, the criminal elements figured that out and they started attacking it. And not to say that now many companies have done a much better job, and even I have card on file on places like Amazon. But when they started out, and even today, they are vulnerable to breaches that never existed before because there wasn't payment over the internet. Now, then the next thing that happened is if you get into about the 2014, 15 timeframe, that's when chip cards started coming in. Chip card was meant to stop counterfeit fraud. And the way it does it, and I'll mention this a little bit later, but they call it dynamic data authentication. So the chip gives a way to authenticate that something came from that card, that chip. And if someone were to try to copy the card, copy the chip even, and use it someplace else, they'd be able to identify it didn't come from the real chip. And therefore it has to be counterfeit. And so it is actually amazingly good technology to stop counterfeit. And it has taken it from the largest problem in the card industry to one of the smaller problems in the card industry. So the chip on your card is highly, highly effective. It doesn't help that much with mobile or internet payments though, and make the internet more so than mobile. And I'll talk about that in a little bit too. But because on the internet, you don't have card readers, there's no way to read that chip. Therefore, the chip technology doesn't help for remote payments that are from your computer anyway. There are cases that can be helpful on your phone now, and I'll mention that in a bit. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, I've heard some people or things out there. Again, it's the internet. It's what the internet does, saying that they can scan your chips off your cards from your wallet if they walk by you with the right gadget. Is that even close to being true?
Yeah, for the wireless. Yeah, in the early days, there was some accuracy to that, in that they could, and quite frankly, today even, they can read some information on it, but what has happened is the payment industry and the card industry recognize that. And so they've now got it such that there's really nothing meaningful that they can get from it. And that would be effective because there's still this dynamic authentication function that's happening. So, if in 2013, 2012, maybe 2014, that was a true statement. But now that, yes, you can read it because it's RF, but you can't really do anything with it. And they don't give you any personal information that comes from it either.
I have noticed.
Go ahead.
I have noticed that it takes longer to process a chip card than the
Yeah.
traditional credit card of the past, a few extra seconds.
Right. And a big concern for the merchants. In fact, they fought the adoption of chip cards for that reason. And because it's amazing, 1 second in line is actually millions of dollars for the Targets and Walmarts in cases like that. You just add it up. And so it was a big issue for them. And so, yeah, there's an authentication process that happens. The chip authenticates itself to the terminal authenticates itself to the chip, and then it packages information and goes to the issuer, and the issuer authenticates. It's a cryptogram, they call it, created from cryptography from this, a cryptographic engine that's on the chip itself. And that takes a little bit of time. Now, if you go to the contactless, it uses all the same technology, but it relies more on the issuer authentication process instead of the processing on the chip itself. And so it makes it faster. And other countries in the world, they went to the contact chip first, and then they introduced the contactless, and they very rapidly moved to that because people recognized it was so much faster. And there are some merchants you might tell that if you go with your contact chip, that it's faster at some merchants than others, and it has to do with how well they programmed their terminals. But there's a lot of pressure put on the card industry to do, I think what they called it is something like a fast EMV, where I'm probably not at liberty to tell you the details of exactly what happened, but they skipped a particular point where you had to wait until a certain point in the transaction before you could start the processing. And they made it so that as soon as you inserted the chip, they could start the processing. And that really saved as much as 10 seconds at times in the early days. But yeah, good observation on that. So then now about that same time, Apple was masterful with coming up with the idea of how do you get Apple Pay and on the iPhone, and you work with the card networks, they couldn't do it with a single entity. They was like, okay, if you're going to do this, we have to do it with Samsung, we have to do it with everybody. And so they leveraged many of the standards that exist in the processes, changed a few things with it, made it really easy for a consumer to adopt it. Take a picture of the card, a couple steps, and voila, you've got your credit card or debit card on your mobile phone. So that was amazing. But many of the merchants were a little bit hesitant to allow that capability. They're afraid of what, is Apple going to try to take too much control of that money? Are they going to start charging us if it came from their phone? A lot of questions about that surfaced. And so even though the capability was there from about 2015, the industry, there's a lot of hesitation, and not until probably 2019 and now the pandemic did the use of the contactless and the mobile phone and the contactless card started to explode. And one of the things that people don't realize is that when you do use your mobile phone, and whether it's Samsung Pay or Apple Pay or one of the pays, that is actually the most secure payment you can do. And if they're using that technology for a remote payment on your phone over the internet, that again is still the most secure payment you can make. And the reason for it is what they did is they took the chip processing power that's on that chip and they inserted it into the mobile phone, and they use that process. And so if you use a mobile phone at the point of sale, it uses all that we call EMV or chip card technology for authentication, dynamic authentication. Then on top of that, it uses something they call tokenization. So they don't use your actual credit or debit card number. There's another token that's being used, and there's all kinds of analysis that can be done that if someone were to perform a data breach and they took that information, they try to use it, it gets shut down immediately. So by far, Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, any of those pays from your mobile phone, that is the most secure payment you can make today. And then, so you look from this 2015 into about, it was really short, probably 2014 to 2017, 18, right in there. suddenly you had the Internet of Things, you had the mobile phone becoming a payment device, you had the mobile phone becoming a payment terminal. Suddenly P2P payments, Venmo, and now Zelle, and other ones are out there. There's something they call in-app, and that's where the Uber, where you pay through Uber or any of these other new apps where you pay through the app itself. We call that an in-app payment capability or wallet. And then, cryptocurrencies started coming up in that time, but, we're still not seeing them used. So they're out there. They're just not being used very much in the United States. Whereas in China, they've had millions and millions and millions of cryptocurrency transactions there already. So you can see both from the sales channel where you're receiving the payment and the payment device, there was just an explosion of both of them. Any other questions on this one? So what is that, payment innovation at the edge? I could. So we just talked about this, that there's all these things I mentioned on the previous page. So what are the vulnerabilities that came about from that? Well, if you look at all the fraud, the highest form or the largest volume of payment fraud is from remote payments. It's more than double than in-person payments. So these are, I apologize for this data being dated, and that's because the Federal Reserve performs these payment studies that are very precise. We actually take 18 months to 2 years oftentimes to analyze and try to understand the data, the nuances, what about it, the way we collected it, or industry things that are happening that could give the wrong impression. So it's the whole idea that you can lie with data and statistics. Well, for us, it's how do you make sure you're interpreting the data correctly so you're not inadvertently conveying the wrong story. But so the big piece here is that, and this hasn't changed, and we do have an update. We just haven't. We might have just published it, and I just didn't get this up in my slide. But the theme is that the fraud rate for remote payments is growing at twice the rate of any other one, and it is now, I believe, finally surpassed. I believe this is the case. The remote payments has surpassed in-person payments, the fraud rate. So I'm not saying we're 20% or anything like that. It's still a very well managed rate. The financial institutions, everybody involved in this are still doing a really great job. And you as consumers probably are always made whole, which actually is, some people think is one of the problems of the payments industry, because if we weren't made whole, then what would happen is we'd start searching for the financial institutions and the devices that have the best security. So, our liabilities are secured. But since that's not happening, the consumers aren't involved in that kind of free market dynamic to help drive the innovation at even greater level to solve for the problem. Card not present fraud. This is from online shopping channel, ranked #1. You can see card not present fraud in that top line, and across different categories of sizes. In-person card fraud is still #2. Business email compromise, if you think of this in terms of volume, it may be lower, but something that people don't realize, Minnesota is actually in the top, I want to say 6 states in the country with the highest rate of business email compromise. And what that is that it's in the B2B payment space where someone will contact the accounts payable group of a business, and they will convince them to change the account that they should make the payment for. And there's all kinds of procedures that businesses try to put in place before someone can change an account for the accounts payable side. But these oftentimes are very large amounts. And like I said, within, I believe Minnesota might even be in the top 4 in terms of the dollar amount that has been stolen in business email compromise. It's a very big issue out there in the B2B payment space, and it's caused from phishing. Phishing is probably the biggest thing. All these emails coming in acting like, hey, this is urgent. You need to change our account right away. We need the money so we can do this. You got to do it by 2:00 today. Something like that. And again, without email, this is the type of thing that wouldn't happen. Without the internet going in and looking at the positions that people have, and then trying to find out their email address, and then acting as if you know them or you know who they report to, and say, hey, I spoke to so-and-so and they said I need to contact you to change this right away. So once again, you see what the internet, websites, email, how they've really changed the dynamic of the payment space and the vulnerabilities. Increasing computing power and speed. So this is one where we've all heard, right, that we have more computing power on our phone than what NASA had to help put the astronauts on the moon. And yes, that is true. And that speed and power is growing rapidly. But something you may not have heard of is there's something called quantum computing. And so it basically is what it suggests. There's a quantum leap in the computing power that's happening there. And it could be really beneficial for things such as weather forecasting and simulations and artificial intelligence. And what quantum computing does particularly well is take in large volumes of data and then generate high volumes of scenarios, possible scenarios that come out of it. So you think of it in weather forecasting. If you can in sub-second time or very, very rapidly change many variables or feed new variables that are coming in, and that can basically feed an artificial intelligence engine to predict this is where it looks like things are going. Very, very powerful. Now, we're not there yet, but China, Russia, the United States, other countries, North Korea, they're investing a lot of money into trying to realize this capability. It has been actually developed, but how do you scale it? And they're predicting anywhere from 5 to 10 years from now, it could be scalable. It could be used potentially for state attacks, for those very profitable remote fraud operations out of Eastern Europe and whatnot. They may get a hold of the technology and use it. And what's really scary about this, cryptography is really becoming more and more important in our payment security. So you may heard symmetric key technology where you have to have a shared key and both sides needs to know exactly what that key is, and then you can secure everything. Then there's asymmetric technology where you've got a private key, which the crypto wallets use today. You've got to have a private key, but then there's this public key. Public key can be shared with anybody, and then you can safely encrypt and preserve the confidentiality of your information, as well as the authenticity of it too, so you can authenticate effectively. And the scary thing about this and quantum computing is most of the internet is secured through the asymmetric technology, public-private key technology, and also known as RSA. And the quantum computing can be used to guess that private key. So what in today's technology could take decades, maybe even 100 years or so to crack, it can actually do it in sub-minute time, and possibly within, definitely within seconds. And so a vast majority of all the systems that are being protected right now with asymmetric technology, that's got to change before this becomes real. And that's a 10-year change for the infrastructure. So it's something we've got to start moving on now. And the good news, there is movement on it. What it doesn't do well is hard math. And so ironically, the shared key, the private key where everybody has to you have to share this one private key between two parties bilateral. That quantum computing does not have an advantage over. The only problem with that, that's not very scalable. You can't put a private key in every terminal in every merchant and expect it to remain private, right? You can do that with asymmetric key technology, put the public keys out there, but you can't do it with shared key technology. So NIST, the National Institute of Standards, Science and Standards, they're working on the cryptography that can protect against this new attack that is expected to be coming down the road. So kind of a quick summary of the technology and the vulnerabilities. So, ad nauseum, the internet and the mass connectivity, the connected network systems are out there, the increasing computer power, the speed, the software tools to make it easier. How many of our kids now can develop tools with software? And when many of us were in college, we did the card thing, right? And maybe some of us I programmed a little bit in my day, but the tools that are available to make it much more efficient in the development of much more sophisticated tools, those tools are being used to protect the system, but they're also being used to attack the system. Then there's the rapid acceleration of remote payments. We've talked about that. And then the rapid introduction of new payment devices. And this last part, that's static data authentication, if you look on the screen, the best way to describe this is the mag stripe on your credit card. And so the mag stripe, that was what was on that mag stripe was the data that they used to authenticate you, right? And that couldn't be changed easily by the readers at the merchants. And so if somebody stole your credit card, they could make 100 copies of that mag stripe, and they could do it literally in minutes, and then have people hit the stores as quickly as they could. And they would find out, well, this one goes to this merchant acquirer, this one goes to that merchant acquirer, so they would know they may not get back to the particular bank or whatnot on time, or go to the merchants that had a problem with the terminal, or they'd even cause a problem with the terminal itself. All kinds of tricks they have. That was static data. So if you copied it, you could use it. And this is where the chip comes in, and that even if you knew how to copy the chip, it doesn't help you because there's a dynamic interaction between the terminal, the chip, and the bank. And if you copied it very, very, very quickly, almost instantly, they become out of sync. And somebody the only way that card can work is if there's a mistake on the bank's part in the processing of it. There could be something, I suppose, within terminal the merchant or whatnot, but they're very, very rare mistakes. And there's not something that a criminal element could try to perform at scale or instigate happening on it. So that's kind of the impact of technology and payments, both the good side, all the new capabilities we can use as consumers, but also kind of the vulnerabilities that they've exposed, and the fact that all of them, except for, I said, 2 systems in the United States, were designed before the internet. Therefore, they didn't even comprehend these vulnerabilities could come about. Therefore, they didn't integrate into it the protection mechanisms for it. So, what are the payments? It's faster payments. It's that SIPS thing, the strategy for payment, the U.S. payment system. That's the new payment systems that are coming. So there's an entity called the Clearinghouse, TCH, and the Federal Reserve, FedNow. There's 2 instant payment systems being put in place. You don't hear them as these terms, RTP, real-time payment system, and the FedNow payment system. You probably hear them as Zelle or maybe aspects of Venmo. But it actually facilitates real-time settlement. So as soon as you make that payment, your bank gets the settlement into your account immediately. And the infrastructure isn't completely there yet. We're building it out. When you use a Zelle, all the banks basically are agreeing, hey, we're going to make the funds available instantly, even though we don't have it settled yet. But Zelle also has a number of large banks that have implemented the instant settlement capability. And this is hitting not only the consumer side of things, but they're bringing this into the B2B payments side too. So these systems have been designed in the last few years. So they recognize, understand what they have to deal with. And so they've been in a much better position to put in the protection mechanisms, in this new environment. And a couple key things on this ISO 20022, it's a pretty technical term, but it's basically the messaging for these payment systems and the way that we call it structured data. So the data going through it is much richer, meaning there's more data in it. And each piece of data in it is readily identified by a software program. And so therefore you can automate processing of it. And so that we call it straight through processing, get it to the point where electronic payment from initiation through something we call cash application into the accounts receivable systems can be done without manual intervention. And that's what we want to get to for these faster payment systems, for the ACH payment system, which is the demand deposit and the whole settlement system that the United States works on today. It's either these ACH or these wire systems. The wire system is, believe it or not, a real-time settlement, but people don't use that very often. It's more business to business. But the ACH system is that where, it might take 2 or 3 days before it hits your account. So I'm going to stop there. Anybody have any questions about these faster payment systems? They're moving from end-of-day batch processing to real-time transaction processing.
Well, my question has to do with all of this fraud that has and is going on. How does our economy put up with that? I mean, if each one of those transactions had happened to me and I called the credit card company and said, this is wrong, my bank account would be hurting.
Well, like I said, I don't want to come off too much as alarmist here, because they actually do a really good job of it. In the worst case scenario, even with the remote payments, cumulatively, it's probably only in the 8% range. And there's, some financial institutions that do it much, much better. So they might be down to 3 or 4%. But in the grand scheme of things, it really, that's being built into the price of products, unfortunately. That's what's happening. It really isn't, it's nowhere near a crisis, nowhere near, but there's lots of room for improvement, and there's tremendous amount of money being put into it. So hopefully that answers your question. But yeah, I mean, me too. I question, and I really like it when I get these phone notifications of, hey, there's this transaction that happened. To me, that's a lifesaver. There have been a number of times that I've had something come in at 2 a.m, like 2 a.m, I didn't make this payment. But one thing I've started to notice happen now is that they're coming through in a delayed manner. So I will make a payment at 7 o'clock in the evening, and that might not come through until 2. That warning won't come through until 2 a.m. So I'm not sure what's happening that's caused that delay recently. It's a little bit bothersome to me. But if you can turn on those notices whenever somebody performs a transaction, it is a little bit annoying, because for my debit account, my checking account, made a change recently, and now my wife knows every time I buy something, and said, well, Guy, why did you buy that? And that's a bit annoying. But
do you have a sense of which way the money is going in the world? Is money leaving America faster than it's coming in? Do you know that one?
Well, interesting statistic that 67% of all US dollars are held abroad. So there are more US dollars held abroad than in the United States. And that most economies in the United States have the US dollar as their reserve currency, not even their own currency. So I could probably get you those particular numbers. I don't know them off the top of my head, but my belief would be that we probably have the second most coming in. China probably has the most coming in because everybody started outsourcing manufacturing to them, and so suddenly there's a lot of payments going into China, and they're not buying a lot from other countries except for maybe the natural resources that they don't have on hand. So my guess would we'd be number 2 in the world for currency coming in. China's probably number 1, but it's US dollars that's going into China. They're trying very hard to stop that.
I was going to say, my question was balance of trade. Are we sending more dollars away than we're getting back?
Well, because we're consuming more than any other economy in the world, we're sending more money out would be my belief, but I might be wrong on that one.
I have a question here.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's quite on the topic here, but we'll find out. I'm curious because you're always hearing about all this ransomware going on and payments being made. Is there any kind of even close to helping as if they could make that the cryptocurrencies have a traceable cryptocurrency, and that's the only kind that will be accepted anywhere?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So China is leading the world right now in cryptocurrency experimentation, and of course they want to identify everything. So they've implemented a methodology. So they claim that if they want to, they can track everything, but they don't. And I'm not sure that their own citizens necessarily trust that. I'm not sure that we believe it. And that's one of the big debates in the US and around the world is when you implement a cryptocurrency, do you at the same time implement a digital ID? To what extent do you facilitate anonymity? And the other side is AML, we call it anti-money laundering compliance, and KYC, know your customer. And the United States, for any financial institution, any entity, money service provider out there, they have very strict know your customer requirements. And that's where they ask for all the IDs and everything, try to verify your identity when you first start doing business with them. And the question is on a cryptocurrency, where do you do that, and where do you program in privacy or not? And the United States is probably going to be on the side of the spectrum of assuring privacy, assuring as much anonymity as possible, but yet layer in this know your customer. So, you get cash from your bank, right? The bank knows you because you have an account, they vetted you, but then you go use that cash and there is no tying you to that cash. Now, maybe cryptocurrency could work in that same way. There's a KYC about who has that initially, but when they spend it, maybe there's a buffer to facilitate that privacy. We don't know where that's going, and we're going to need to get congressional direction on that. But my guess is, given the market, is it's going to be assurance of privacy and just enough anonymity to still allow anti-money laundering protections, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because to me, it's like in the Hollywood movies where they say they're going to pay the ransom and whatever, then they supposedly got all the serial numbers of the bills they're going to give the bad guy, that kind of stuff. And I'm just kind of thinking this way, maybe if they could do something equivalent to that, maybe that hopefully would reduce the chances of ransomware attacks happening, because if they know it can be traced, hopefully you can eventually catch them or not.
Right, and the tracing is actually in the blockchain technology, and it's not a foregone conclusion that a central bank digital currency has to be done with blockchain. The blockchain stores the history of every transaction and every fraction of a transaction. So Bitcoin today, I think it might be at 62, hovering around that 62K, and but we could buy 1/100th of that or 1/1000th of that. So it gets fractionalized in a way that you can't do in today's money. We can do it down to the penny. So it's 1/100th of a dollar, but it can go way beyond that in that fractionalization. And how do you track that? Well, the blockchain technology actually would facilitate that, but you could probably very quickly get into information overload, and is it meaningful or is it too much to digest? You know, maybe the quantum computing will be needed to analyze the information, but you know, it's a real good question, and it's really going to be a policy decision, not a technology decision, to determine how that's, you know, what's done with that. I'm going to touch base here on a couple of things. This is something they call the money flower, and if you look at it, there's, you know, it's different ways of looking at digital currencies that exist today. So you can see, or just currencies. So you see cash on the lower bottom part here. It says wildly acceptable or accessible. So there's cash. There's something we call central bank digital tokens, general purpose, central bank accounts, general purpose, and bank deposits. So bank deposits up here in the upper, that's where consumers, retail, the part in the gray is much more commercial. It's bank to bank and businesses accounts. So this is everything kind of that happens behind the scenes that most consumers don't see, but the corporates and corporate treasury management see, and the central banks see. And you see in the digital, you know, there are, you know, consumer accounts are digital, right? Most of our money is digital today. You know, the amount of cash I have versus the digital account that I have at the bank, I mean, there's no comparison. So we're already in a digital money age. And a lot of people don't realize that. The central bank issued money, and then there's this token based. I'm not going to get too much in the token, but that's where a lot more of the cryptocurrencies come into play. And what I want to talk about a little bit more is, you know, what is a central bank digital currency versus all these Bitcoin and all these private digital alternate coins, altcoins that are out there. The big difference is that a central bank digital currency the central bank has the liability. So there's a claim against the central bank. And right now, by law, the United States, our central bank, the Federal Reserve, cannot have a consumer, cannot have a retail account. We can't do it. We cannot see anything that's going on in any consumer's account. The banks can, but we cannot. And that's by law. And so if we were to issue a central bank digital currency where the Federal Reserve or Treasury would have visibility or even the ability to manage an account for somebody, there's going to have to be a legal change. Congress is going to have to pass an act for that to happen. And then anything that would be developed, you know, would be look at the individual, retail, and the business needs, and there'd be all these policy objectives, and you'd be amazed at the things that we have to look at for policy objectives, such as privacy, KYC, AML, you know, so many you know, other things that we have to take into account. Now, if we look at this just a little bit deeper, you know, if you look on the left, we've got cash, we have central bank digital currency, your debit card checking account, like I mentioned already, most of our money is there, it's digital today. Then there's the stable coin, which just basically means that there's a cryptocurrency. They're saying we're tying the value of it to you know, either the US dollar or some basket of currencies. They say that it will fluctuate with that particular currency. It's not going to be driven by market forces like what's happened with Bitcoin, Ethereum, and those. Now, you look in the third column, it says, you know, what is the claim on the central bank? And I apologize, but I, for some reason, cannot get my phone oftentimes to stop ringing. So hopefully that's not going to bother anybody. So the central bank, is there a claim on the central bank? And again, that means, do we have the account on it? So if it's a central bank digital currency, yes, there is a claim on the central bank. Even cash, there's a claim on the central bank. But there isn't for any of these others. It's the commercial bank. It's whatever the arrangement for the stable coin, and the cryptocurrency, nobody has the claim on it, right? Nobody holds the liability. The chain does. So does it require banks as intermediaries? So the first two, cash, it doesn't really require it, but they tend to do it, but not for the clearing and settlement. The central bank does a lot of that clearing and settlement side of it. So each one of these, the debit accounts is the only one that really requires a bank to play a role as an intermediary. And by the way, that's where that funds the whole lending system of the United States. They get their deposits, and the deposits are what fuel the business lending, our whole credit infrastructure. So if all of a sudden all those deposits went to cryptocurrencies and the banks didn't have it, where do the businesses go to get their loans? So this is a really interesting dynamic, that competition for deposits and cryptocurrencies versus traditional banking. What requires a distributed ledger technology? That's that blockchain where you've got a ledger in many copies of the ledger. It could be 2 copies to 1,000 copies or thousands of copies that are automatically updated and kept in sync with each other. And those are only involved in the cryptocurrency and the stable coin. We got various backup systems or resiliency systems for all other forms of cash out there. And notice the central bank digital currency, it does not say it requires blockchain. Now, a lot of them will be using it, but it definitely does not require blockchain. And blockchains can be public like Bitcoin, or they can be private. And what that means is that a central bank could implement a blockchain-based digital currency, but only the central bank would run the nodes that are performing the authentication process. Nobody else would have access to it in any way. So that basically becomes a private blockchain system as opposed to the Bitcoin public blockchain system. And then what comes is the next thing, and I'll stop here to let you ask questions on this because you probably have questions, but this whole DeFi, they call it, which is decentralized finance. And the idea that, in the past, you couldn't just start your own lending system or your own banking payment system, but in a way, these blockchain systems, it's almost like a development kit. It's like taking the days when you used to have a DB2 programmer create a database. Now you buy from Microsoft Access, and in a few seconds, you can develop a new database. And there's all kinds of tools to create user interfaces around those databases too. And that's kind of what a blockchain system is to a payment system. So suddenly it becomes, amazingly available to entities. And now the only question is, can they recruit the funding that backs that payment system? And once they do, then they can start lending it out to whoever they want at whatever interest rates they want. So that's what they mean by decentralized finance. Anybody who has a blockchain system creates a pool of money and then create policies and procedures to let their, let's call it micro ecosystem, their private community, to start lending to them based on whatever their criteria is. And that can be a very big risk or threat to the way the lending structure works in the United States, which is probably viewed in the world. Our lending system is the most sophisticated, the best operated in the world, and that's why we're the world leader in business. So I'm going to stop with the presentation at this point, and just give you the opportunity if you have any questions. And hopefully this has been interesting stuff.
I just like to know the fact that I don't have to have a tinfoil in my wallet to protect my credit cards from being scanned.
Yeah, no, you don't. Again, they might scan it, but good luck doing anything meaningful with it. Anybody else have any questions? Any questions about cryptocurrency, about what's going on or anything like that?
Even a realtor in our small town of 20,000 people, he's selling houses on cryptocurrency. Can you believe that? Bitcoin.
he's probably keeping the cryptocurrency himself and getting what we call the fiat dollars.
Is that so?
Yeah, no, it's huge. That arbitrage, I'll call it. There were people. Think of it. A month ago, Bitcoin was at 30,000. If someone was buying something, and rather than giving up that Bitcoin, they kept it. Now it's 62,000. So they've just doubled their profit by just holding on to it.
Or it could divide in half or
Or
quarter
it could
go broke.
tomorrow. Yep, tomorrow it could go down to 15,000. Yep. Yep. That volatility, that's why it's not a currency. It's not a store of value that you can count on. And again, it's not something that people are using because, how would any of us feel if we were the first person who bought that pizza with, I don't know, 10,000 Bitcoin? We would be retired, and everybody in our family for the next couple of generations could probably retire if we had not bought that pizza. And so it's more becoming a hedge for inflation. Is it the digital substitute for gold? And that's still a question out there. For those countries that have hyperinflation, which there are still quite a few of them out there, believe it or not, even as volatile as it is, they're better off putting their money into Bitcoin and hoping for the best, rather than when I did some work down in Brazil, they had to change their banking system, make them so incredibly agile because of the hyperinflation. Just they'd get the money and they go spend it right away, because if they didn't spend it the next day, it was going to be worth less. They had less buying power, purchasing power with it.
Well, I wouldn't bet my future on it.
No, don't put your 401k into it, a cryptocurrency right now.
Well, it almost sounds like the Bitcoin's a stock.
I'm not sure about Bitcoin, but if you think of all the alternative coins, they're all representing different platforms and different solutions in the out there. So I'd agree. I would say most of the altcoins out there, it's like a new age stock. It's not the way anybody's looked at it. They're not viewed as securities right now, but the reality is they represent a implementation of a blockchain that's designed that they're hoping will take off, and everybody will start implementing in business specific solutions. So it's very much like you're betting on this company is going to be successful. Any other questions? Has this been hopefully interesting?
Trevor, are you trying to ask a question there?
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot about Biden's budget stuff, or the financial bills he's trying to get passed right now. Will that affect cryptocurrency at all?
Could someone repeat that? I couldn't hear it very well.
I think he's asking about certain legislation moving through Congress.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, some of the, at least tidbits I've seen on social media saying that they could somehow clamp down on cryptocurrencies, if there's any truth to that.
The really interesting thing about this, if you go to the inside story within the industry, almost any entity that has a cryptocurrency, maybe other than Bitcoin, they want regulation, because regulation is needed to legitimize it, and they believe that it'll help the industry segment just take off. So most people that are really close to this, that are in these companies, they actually want regulation, and almost have been pleading for it. And I think even Coinbase came out recently talking about the need for it so badly. Now there is the legislation you might be talking about is where they're trying to find ways to tax people that are involved in the cryptocurrencies and the enrichment they're getting from it to fund other things. And So let's put it this way. I'd say that the ability to become enriched through cryptocurrency could be impacted pretty significantly for the average citizen and for everybody through the taxation. But that's very different than the potential impact on the adoption of these blockchain technologies and cryptocurrencies. Most people feel that regulation will give them certainty of direction, therefore they can invest with confidence in more full speed ahead. But for you and I, if we had the courage to put $60,000 into a Bitcoin, and it were to go up to what some people are projecting, $100,000 to $300,000, you know, some of the things that they're talking about, much more of that would go to the government instead of in our own pocket. I think that's would be the net impact of some of that legislation to the consumers, to us.
Well, I got about 259, Taylor.
Yep, I'm not sure if the meeting room will kick us out or not. I hope not, but I've had some unfortunate experiences before.
Yeah, when actually I do have to go. Hour and a half out of my day is quite a bit of time here, so I do have to jump off at 3. Again, I hope this information was interesting to you and valuable, and hope you have a much better sense for things that we work on here at the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, very much was. Thank you, sir. We greatly appreciate the time, especially for an industry that's not quite in your backyard in the normal sense.
Yeah,
Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, and I did notice that you had this recorded, and I just asked you to be, reserved about maybe sharing this particular recording, and everything that I stated again was just my perspective and interpretation, and by no means represents the position of the Federal Reserve.
We'll make sure that disclaimer is noted.
Okay. Well, thank you,
Guy.
everyone. Yep. And have a great day and a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
You as well. Thank you.
Thank you.